The wedding stranger. The reception hall glowed with warm amber light from crystal chandeliers hanging overhead. Round tables draped in cream linens filled the space, each one crowned with arrangements of white roses and baby's breath. The soft sounds of conversation and clinking glasses created a gentle hum throughout the room. Sarah sat at table 9, near the back corner by the tall windows. Her emerald green dress felt perfect when she'd chosen it weeks ago, but now she tugged at the hem nervously. The empty chairs surrounding her seemed to announce her solitude to everyone who passed by. Her date had cancelled 3 hours before the ceremony, leaving her to face the evening alone. She watched the other guests with careful observation. Couples leaned into each other, sharing quiet jokes and stolen kisses. Groups of college friends clustered together, their laughter rising above the background music. Everyone seemed to have someone. Everyone except her. The bride, Rebecca, floated past in her flowing white gown, her face radiant with joy. Sarah had known Rebecca since high school, but their friendship had grown distant over the years. Different cities, different lives, different paths. Now Rebecca was surrounded by her closest friends and family, while Sarah felt like a stranger at her own friend's celebration. A server approached with the main course. Sarah smiled politely as the plate was set before her, but her appetite had disappeared. The herb-crusted chicken looked delicious, but eating alone at a wedding felt somehow wrong. She picked at the roasted vegetables, watching the dance floor where couples swayed to a gentle love song. The evening stretched ahead of her like an endless road. She calculated in her mind how long she needed to stay to be polite. Another hour, maybe 2. Then she could slip away quietly, drive home to her apartment, and pretend this awkward evening had never happened. Her phone buzzed against her clutch purse. A text message from her sister asking how the wedding was going. Sarah stared at the screen, unsure how to respond. Lonely, embarrassing, exactly what she'd expected. Instead, she typed back a simple, beautiful ceremony, and set the phone aside. The string quartet began a new song, something soft and romantic that made her chest feel tight. Sarah reached for her water glass and noticed her hand trembling slightly. She was being ridiculous. She was a successful 32-year-old woman with a good job in her own apartment. She shouldn't feel this affected by sitting alone at a wedding. But she did. Just as she was considering another trip to the restroom to compose herself, someone cleared their throat beside her table. Sarah looked up to see a man about her age standing nearby. He had kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and wore a navy suit that looked comfortable rather than stiff. His brown hair was slightly tousled, as if he'd been running his fingers through it. He leaned down slightly, speaking in a voice just loud enough for her to hear over the ambient noise. "Excuse me," he said quietly, "but I have a rather unusual request. Would you mind terribly if I sat with you for a while? I'm trying to avoid someone, and you look like you could use some company." Sarah blinked, surprised by the directness of his approach. She studied his face, looking for signs of pity or mockery, but found only genuine warmth and a touch of nervousness. "Avoiding someone?" she asked, curious despite herself. The man glanced over his shoulder toward a table near the dance floor, then back to her. "My ex-girlfriend is here with her new boyfriend. They've been shooting looks in my direction all evening, and I think she might be working up the courage to come over and make small talk. I'd rather not have that conversation tonight." Sarah followed his gaze and spotted a blonde woman in a red dress who was indeed looking their way with obvious interest. The woman whispered something to her companion, a tall man with perfectly styled hair, and they both turned to stare. "Ah," Sarah said, understanding immediately. "And you think having a companion might discourage her?" "Exactly," he said, looking relieved that she understood. "I'm David, by the way. And I promise I'm not as pathetic as this request makes me sound." Sarah couldn't help but smile at his honesty. "I'm Sarah, and actually, your timing is perfect. I was just wondering how long I needed to stay here to be polite." David's expression shifted to one of genuine concern. "Rough evening. Date cancelled at the last minute," Sarah explained, gesturing to the empty chairs around her. "I'm discovering that being alone at a wedding is about as comfortable as wearing shoes 2 sizes too small." "Then we can help each other," David said, settling into the chair beside her. 2 people avoiding uncomfortable situations instead of one person sitting alone. As David joined her, Sarah felt some of the weight lift from her shoulders. He had an easy way of talking that made her feel less self-conscious. He told her about his work as a librarian, how he'd known the grooms since college, and his recent discovery of a hiking trail that led to a hidden waterfall just outside the city. The food on her plate suddenly looked appealing again. Sarah found herself actually eating, actually enjoying the conversation. David made observations about the other guests that were amusing without being unkind, and he listened with genuine interest when she told him about her work as a graphic designer. When the band started playing upbeat dance music, David asked if she'd like to dance. Sarah hesitated for a moment, then nodded. They made their way to the dance floor, where other couples were already moving to the rhythm of a classic rock song. Dancing with David felt surprisingly natural. He wasn't the smoothest dancer, but he was confident enough to lead and considerate enough to stay in step with her abilities. When a slower song began, he pulled her a little closer, and Sarah felt herself relaxing for the first time all evening. "Thank you," she said as they swayed together, "for rescuing me from my table of solitude." "Thank you for rescuing me from my ex-girlfriend," David replied with a smile. Then his expression grew more serious. "Actually, I should confess something." Sarah felt her stomach flutter with uncertainty. "What's that?" "My ex-girlfriend isn't here," David said quietly. "I made that up." Sarah stopped dancing, stepping back to look at him properly. "What do you mean?" David's cheeks reddened, but he held her gaze. "I noticed you sitting alone during the ceremony. You looked so sad, and when I saw you during dinner, still by yourself, I wanted to talk to you. But I couldn't think of a way to approach without seeming like I was taking pity on you. So I invented a story about needing to avoid someone." Sarah stared at him, processing this admission. The blonde woman in the red dress was probably just another wedding guest, completely unaware of the fictional drama David had created around her. "You lied to me," Sarah said slowly. "Yes," David admitted. "I'm sorry. I should have just introduced myself honestly, but I was afraid you might think I was being condescending or intrusive." Sarah considered this for a long moment, aware that other couples were dancing around them while they stood still in the middle of the floor. Then, unexpectedly, she began to laugh. "That might be the kindest lie anyone has ever told me," she said. David's face brightened with relief. "Does that mean you forgive me?" "It means," Sarah said, stepping back into his arms as the music continued, "that I'd like to hear some honest stories from you. Maybe over coffee sometime." "I'd like that very much," David said, and they began dancing again. As the evening continued around them, Sarah realized that sometimes the most genuine connections come from the most unexpected moments. She'd arrived at the wedding feeling invisible and alone, but she was leaving with David's phone number written on a cocktail napkin and plans to meet him the following weekend. Walking to her car later, the cool night air fresh against her skin, Sarah reflected on the evening's surprising turn. Sometimes rescue comes in the form of a kind stranger who sees you across a crowded room and takes a chance on connection, even if it means starting with a gentle fiction that leads to a more beautiful truth.